At the family's New Year's Eve party, my name was listed as the Envious Old Woman. When I discovered who wrote it, I revealed a secret that had been kept for years. I wish I could say I was surprised. The truth is, I'd spent years ignoring the little jabs, the subtle exclusions, the conversations that stopped when I entered the room. But seeing it written down like that, the Envious Old Woman, right there on the gift exchange list, where everyone could see it, that was different. That was deliberate. My hands trembled as I stood in my son Thomas's elegant foyer, staring at the paper pinned to the corkboard where family announcements were usually posted. Around me, laughter and conversation flowed as relatives gathered for our annual New Year's Eve celebration, oblivious to the knife that had just been plunged into my heart. I checked the list again, hoping I'd misread. Thomas and Rachel, hosting. My sister-in-law Linda and her husband, my nieces with their families, and there, at the bottom, Rebecca, the Envious Old Woman. "Grandma, come see what I got for Christmas." My grandson Ethan pulled at my sleeve, his 7-year-old face bright with excitement. I forced a smile, swallowing down the lump in my throat. "In a minute, sweetheart. Grandma needs to fix something." I carefully unpinned the list, folded it, and slipped it into my pocket. Then I searched the room until I found my daughter-in-law Rachel, radiant in a silver cocktail dress, holding court with some of Thomas's colleagues from the law firm. Rachel had always been beautiful, the kind of effortless beauty that made other women feel somehow lesser just by standing next to her. But tonight, watching her laugh and toss her blonde hair over her shoulder, all I could see was cruelty. Thomas stood nearby, his hand resting possessively on the small of Rachel's back. My son, my only child, who once looked at me like I hung the moon. Now he barely met my eyes. I approached slowly, waiting for a break in the conversation. When Rachel spotted me, her smile tightened just slightly at the corners. "Rebecca, there you are. Everyone's been asking about you." Her voice dripped with honey, but there was a coldness in her eyes I'd grown accustomed to over the years. "I need to speak with you and Thomas," I said quietly. "In private." Thomas frowned. "Mom, we're in the middle of hosting. Can it wait?" "No," I said firmly. "It can't." 10 minutes later, we stood in Thomas's home office, the door closed against the party noise. I placed the folded list on the desk between us. "Would either of you like to explain this?" I asked. Rachel glanced at it dismissively. "It's just the gift exchange list. What about it?" "Read what you wrote next to my name." Thomas picked up the paper, his expression changing as he read it. "Rachel, did you write this?" She rolled her eyes. "It was just a joke, Thomas. Your mother knows I didn't mean anything by it." "A joke?" I repeated, my voice surprisingly steady despite the anger boiling inside me. "To publicly humiliate me in front of our entire family?" "Oh, please." Rachel crossed her arms. "Don't be so dramatic. No one even noticed." "I noticed." The words came out sharper than I intended. Thomas sighed, running a hand through his hair. A gesture so like his father it made my heart ache. "Mom, I'm sure Rachel didn't mean any harm. You know how her sense of humor can be. Always defending her, always taking her side. Did you know about this?" I asked him directly. His hesitation told me everything. "You did," I whispered. "You knew she wrote this, and you let her do it." Rachel snorted. "For God's sake, Rebecca. It's New Year's Eve. Can we not do this tonight? Some of us are trying to enjoy the party." Something in me snapped. 30 years of swallowed words, of turning the other cheek, of making excuses for their behavior. All of it culminated in this moment. "No, Rachel, we're doing this now." I turned to my son. "Thomas, I have put up with her disrespect for years. I've watched you become someone I barely recognize, but this crosses a line. Mom? He started, but I cut him off. Do you know what I was doing when I was your age? I was working 2 jobs to make sure you had everything you needed after your father died. I was skipping meals so you could have new school clothes. I was. My voice broke. I was loving you more than I loved myself. Rachel rolled her eyes again. Here we go with the martyr routine. Thomas placed a warning hand on her arm. For once, he looked uncomfortable. Rachel, that's enough. No, it's not enough, I said, finding strength I didn't know I still had. I've spent years being treated like an inconvenience in my own family, but I won't spend another minute being actively ridiculed. I picked up my purse from the chair where I'd set it. The party's not over, Mom, Thomas said, suddenly looking concerned. Where are you going? I straightened my shoulders and looked him directly in the eyes. Home. To think about whether I want to continue being part of a family that treats me this way. The look of shock on his face was almost worth the pain of the night. Almost. As I walked out of the office, Rachel's dismissive voice followed me. She'll be back. Where else does she have to go? Little did she know, this was just the beginning. The secret I'd kept for 30 years was about to change everything. The drive home from Thomas's house that night was a blur of streetlights and tears. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, trying to focus on the road while memories flooded back like a broken dam. I'd spent 30 years burying certain truths so deeply that sometimes I almost believed my own carefully constructed story. But that night, with the envious old woman still burning in my mind, I couldn't hide from them anymore. My apartment felt especially empty when I returned. It was small but comfortable, all I could afford after helping Thomas with the down payment on his first house. I'd told him it was from his college fund. Another lie in a lifetime of necessary deceptions. I made myself a cup of tea, my hands still trembling slightly, and sat at my kitchen table. The old photo album I rarely looked at anymore sat on the shelf across the room. I hesitated, then retrieved it, dust coating my fingertips. The first photo showed me at 25, holding baby Thomas. My face was thinner then, my smile genuine if exhausted. I traced the outline of the infant in my arms, remembering how tiny he had felt. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Mom, come back to the party. You're making a scene by leaving. I turned the phone face down without replying. More photos. Thomas's first steps. His first day of kindergarten, clutching. My hand so tightly I thought he might never let go. His high school graduation, where I'd worked overtime for months to buy him the watch he wanted. I'd done everything for that boy. After Richard died when Thomas was only 4, I became both mother and father. I took a second job cleaning offices, at night after my day shift at the hospital. I learned to fix leaky faucets and change flat tires. I helped with math homework I barely understood myself. I cheered at every soccer game, attended every parent-teacher conference, cooked every meal. And for what? So my son could stand by while his wife labeled me an envious old woman? I flipped forward in the album to more recent photos. Thomas's law school graduation. The strained smile on my face as I stood slightly apart from him in his cap and gown. The distance had already begun by then. Then came Rachel. They met at a colleague's wedding 6 years ago. Thomas was already establishing himself at the firm, and Rachel was a paralegal with ambitions. She was beautiful, intelligent, and charming when she wanted to be. Thomas was smitten immediately. I remember the first time he brought her to meet me. I'd spent all day cooking his favorite meal, hoping to make a good impression. Rachel had smiled politely, complimented my quaint apartment, and picked at her food. Throughout dinner, she'd steered the conversation toward Thomas's career, his potential, the future she clearly envisioned for them. I barely existed in that vision. After they left, Thomas called to say how much Rachel had liked me. I didn't. have the heart to tell him I'd seen the look of assessment in her eyes, calculating my worth and finding me wanting. The changes were subtle at first. Thomas called less frequently. Our Sunday dinners became monthly, then quarterly. When I visited their new house after they married, Rachel always had some project she needed Thomas's help with, leaving me alone in the living room with a cup of tea and the distinct feeling I was intruding. Then came the grandchildren. Ethan first, then little Sophia 2 years later. I'd hoped becoming a grandmother would bring me closer to Thomas again. But Rachel had other ideas. She controlled my access to the children with an iron fist disguised as velvet gloves. The children are napping, she'd say when I called to visit. Or, we're just so busy with activities this weekend. Or, they've been exposed to something at school, and we wouldn't want you to catch it at your age. Always plausible, always reasonable, always a lie. When I did see the children, Rachel would hover, correcting my outdated childcare techniques, offering helpful suggestions about how grandmothers should behave. Had selected one that made me look washed out and matronly compared to her radiant beauty. The doorbell rang, startling me from my memories. I glanced at the clock, almost midnight. Who would be visiting at this hour on New Year's Eve? I opened the door to find Thomas standing there, his face flushed from the cold or from anger, I couldn't tell which. "Mom," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "What were you thinking, leaving like that? Rachel is upset. The guests are asking questions." "Rachel is upset?" I cut him off, surprising both of us with the sharpness in my voice. "Your wife publicly humiliated me, and you're worried about her feelings?" Thomas sighed heavily, running his hand through his hair again. "Look, I know it was in poor taste, but it was just a joke. You know how Rachel gets when she's planning events. She gets carried away sometimes." This wasn't getting carried away, Thomas. This was deliberate cruelty. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Maybe you're right. I'll talk to her about it." "Like you've talked to her all the other times?" I asked quietly. "When she forgot to invite me to Sophia's birthday party? Or when she told Ethan I was too busy to attend his school play when I'd never even been told about it?" Thomas frowned. "That's not— She wouldn't— She would and she has," I said firmly. "For years. And you've let her." He stood silent for a moment, then checked his watch. "Look, it's nearly midnight. I need to get back to our guests. Can we talk about this tomorrow, when things are calmer?" I looked at my son, the boy I'd given everything for, the man who couldn't see what was right in front of him, and made a decision. "Yes," I said finally. "Tomorrow. There's something important I need to tell you anyway. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Thomas looked relieved, already edging toward the door. "Good. That's good. I'll come by in the afternoon, okay?" After he left, I returned to the photo album, flipping all the way back to the beginning, past Thomas's baby pictures to the ones I usually avoided looking at. The truth was there in those photographs, if anyone had ever looked closely enough. The answer to why I'd accepted Rachel's cruelty for so long. Why I'd endured being pushed aside, marginalized in my own family. Because Thomas wasn't really my son. And tomorrow, after 30 years of silence, I was finally going to tell him the truth. I barely slept that night. How could I, knowing what tomorrow would bring? 30 years of carefully constructed stories were about to crumble. I'd rehearsed this conversation in my mind countless times over the decades, but now that it was actually happening, no prepared speech seemed adequate. Morning came with pale winter sunlight streaming through my curtains. I made coffee and toast, but couldn't eat. My stomach was in knots as I waited for Thomas to arrive. At 10 minutes past 2, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath before answering. Thomas stood there, looking tired. His eyes were slightly bloodshot, probably from staying up late at the party and then dealing with the aftermath of my departure. "Hi, Mom," he said, stepping inside. No hug, I noticed. There hadn't been many of those in recent years. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked, falling back on politeness to delay the inevitable. "No, thanks. I can't stay long. Rachel has a charity, luncheon at 4, and I promised to watch the kids." "Of course." Rachel's schedule always took priority. We sat in my small living room, an uncomfortable silence hanging between us. Thomas checked his phone twice before I'd even started speaking. "I need to show you something," I said finally, rising to retrieve a box from my bedroom closet. It was old, the cardboard worn at the edges from being moved from apartment to apartment over the years. I placed it on the coffee table between us. Thomas eyed it warily. "What's this about, Mom? If this is some kind of evidence you've been collecting." "About Rachel?" "It's not about Rachel," I interrupted. "It's about you, about where you come from." His brow furrowed. "Where I come from? I don't understand." With trembling fingers, I opened the box. Inside were documents I'd kept hidden for 3 decades. A birth certificate showing a different mother's name, letters, hospital records, and photographs I'd never displayed. "After your father died," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I was cleaning out his office when I found these hidden in a locked drawer of his desk." I handed him the birth certificate first. Thomas took it. Confusion etched across his face as he read. "This says my mother is Grace Harmon," he said slowly. "But that was Dad's secretary?" "Not just his secretary," I corrected gently. "She was also my sister." The color drained from Thomas's face. "What are you saying?" "Your father and Grace had an affair. When she got pregnant with you, they kept it secret. Your father didn't want to lose me and Grace. She wasn't ready to be a mother." Thomas shook his head in disbelief. "That's not possible. You're my mother. I have memories of you, of us. I raised you from the time you were 3 months old," I explained. "Grace died in a car accident when you were just a baby. Your father came to me, confessed everything, and asked me to raise you as my own. He was afraid of losing custody to Grace's parents, who never approved of her relationship with a married man." Thomas stood up abruptly, pacing the small confines of my living room. "This is insane. Why are you telling me this now? Is this some kind of revenge because you're upset about Rachel?" "No," I said firmly. "I've wanted to tell you many times over the years, but your father made me promise to keep it secret. He said, it would only hurt you to know." "So what changed?" Thomas demanded, his voice rising. "Why now?" I took a deep breath. "Because I've spent 30 years living with this secret, Thomas. 30 years of guilt every time you thanked me for being such a good mother. 30 years of feeling like I had to earn my place in your life." I gestured toward the box. "There are more documents in there. Letters Grace wrote to your father. Photos of her holding you as a newborn. Hospital records from your birth." Thomas stared at the box as if it might bite him. "I don't believe this." "You have your Aunt Grace's eyes," I said softly. "I used to look at you sometimes and see her looking back at me. It broke my heart and healed it at the same time." He picked up one of the photographs. Grace cradling a newborn, her face radiant despite her exhaustion. The resemblance between them was unmistakable now that he knew to look for it. "My whole life has been a lie," he whispered. "No," I insisted, reaching for his hand. He pulled away. "Your life has been real. Your childhood, your accomplishments, your family, all real. I loved you from the moment your father placed you in my arms. I have always loved you as my own." Thomas looked at me with new eyes, searching for something. Recognition, perhaps, or some physical similarity that would disprove what I was telling him. "Does Rachel know?" The question surprised me. No. No one knows except me. And your father, of course, before he died. Thomas gathered the documents, stuffing them back into the box with shaking hands. I need time to process this. I need to think. I understand, I said, though my heart was breaking all over again. Take all the time you need. He stood, box clutched to his chest. Why didn't you tell me before? I had a right to know. Yes, you did, I acknowledged. But I was afraid of losing you, and your father made me promise. My father, Thomas repeated, as if testing the word. The man who cheated on you with your own sister and then asked you to raise his illegitimate child. I winced at the harshness in his voice. Richard made terrible mistakes, but he loved you. And so did I. So do I. Thomas moved toward the ejector, pausing with his hand on the knob. I need to go. Will you call me? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. When you're ready to talk? He didn't answer. The door closed behind him with a soft click that felt more final than a slam. I sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. The secret that had lived inside me for 3 decades was finally free. But instead of relief, I felt only emptiness and fear. What if Thomas never forgave me for keeping this from him? What if I'd just destroyed what little relationship we had left? I picked up the photo that had fallen from the box, one of Grace holding baby Thomas, and traced her face with my fingertip. I kept my promise, I whispered to my long-dead sister. I raised him as my own. I loved him enough for both of us. But as the afternoon shadows lengthened across my empty apartment, I wondered if love had ever been enough. 3 days passed without a word from Thomas. I called once and left a voicemail that went unanswered. I sent a text asking if he was okay. Nothing. The silence was deafening. I tried to go about my normal routine, volunteering at the library on Tuesday, book club on Wednesday. But my mind was elsewhere. Had I made a terrible mistake? Should I have kept the secret buried, taken it with me to my grave as Richard had intended? On Thursday evening, as I was preparing a simple dinner for myself, the doorbell rang. My heart leaped to my throat. Thomas? But when I opened the door, I found Rachel standing there instead. She looked immaculate as always. Not a hair out of place, designer coat perfectly tailored, makeup flawless despite the January chill. But her eyes were cold with fury. What? Have you done? She demanded, pushing past me into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. I closed the door slowly, steeling myself. Hello, Rachel. Don't hello, Rachel me. She spun around, her expensive perfume filling my small living room. Thomas has barely spoken since New Year's. He's sleeping in the guest room. He won't tell me what's wrong, but I know it has something to do with you. I moved toward the kitchen. Would you like some tea? I don't want tea. I want answers. Her voice rose sharply. What did you tell him? Some lie about me to drive a wedge between us? I filled the kettle anyway, needing something to do with my hands. I told him the truth about something that's What truth? What are you talking about? I turned to face her. I don't think that's my place to tell you. If Thomas wants you to know, he'll share it. Her eyes narrowed. You spiteful old woman. You couldn't stand that we're happy, could you? You couldn't bear that Thomas has a life that doesn't revolve around you. The kettle whistled, and I turned away to silence it. This has nothing to do with you, Rachel. Though I won't pretend your treatment of me over the years has been anything but painful. Oh, here we go. She rolled her eyes dramatically. Poor Rebecca, the victim. It's always about you, isn't it? I poured hot water over a tea bag, watching the color seep out. Actually, it rarely is. That's rather the point. You know what your problem is? Rachel jabbed a manicured finger in my direction. You're jealous. You resent that Thomas chose me, that he values my opinion over yours. You hate that I'm the mother of his children, that I'm the center of his world now. I took a deep breath, then looked her directly in the eyes. No, Rachel. My problem is that you've systematically worked to isolate Thomas from me since the day you met him. My problem is that you've limited my access to my grandchildren. My problem is that you've treated me like an inconvenience rather than family. Her laugh was sharp, brittle. Is that what you told Thomas? Your paranoid delusions about me? I told him the truth about his birth, I said quietly. About his biological mother. Rachel's perfectly sculpted eyebrows drew together in confusion. What are you talking about? You're his mother. No. The word hung in the air between us. I'm his aunt, his father's wife, but not his biological mother. Rachel stared at me, momentarily speechless. I could almost see her mind working, reassessing everything she thought she knew. You're lying, she finally said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. I have the birth certificate, hospital records, photos. Thomas has them now. Rachel sank into one of my kitchen chairs, her composure cracking for the first time since I'd known her. That's what he's been looking at, she murmured, almost to herself. He's been locked in his office with some old box. I sat across from her, cradling my tea. I raised him as my own after his mother, my sister, died. No one knew except his father and me. Why tell him now? Rachel asked, her voice quieter. After all these years? I considered my answer carefully. Partly because of the name tag at the party, I admitted. It was a breaking point for me, but mostly because he deserves to know the truth. I've carried this secret for too long. Rachel was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had regained some of its usual cutting edge. So this is your revenge? For all the perceived slights over the years? Drop a bomb that destroys his sense of identity? It wasn't about revenge, I insisted, though a small, honest part of me wondered if that was entirely true. Had I wanted to shake Thomas's world, to make him question everything, including his relationship with Rachel? Wasn't it? Rachel stood, smoothing her coat. You claim I've tried to separate Thomas from you? Well, congratulations. You might have just done that job yourself. The words stung because they echoed my own fears. That wasn't my intention. Intentions don't matter, Rachel snapped. Results do. And right now, my husband is questioning his entire life because you decided your feelings were more important than his well-being. Before I could respond, the door to my apartment opened. We both turned to see Thomas standing there, key in hand, the spare I'd given him years ago that he so rarely used. His eyes moved from me to Rachel, surprise and then anger crossing his face. What are you doing here? He asked his wife. Rachel immediately softened her posture, her voice taking on a gentler tone I'd never heard her use with me. I was worried about you. You've been so distant, and I thought maybe Rebecca could help me understand what's wrong. Thomas's expression hardened. So you came here behind my back? Did she tell you? He cut her off, gesturing toward me. Rachel hesitated. About your birth mother? Yes. Thomas's jaw tightened. That wasn't her story to tell. I agree, Rachel said quickly. It was completely inappropriate of her to— I'm not finished, Thomas interrupted. Mom, Rebecca, shouldn't have told you. That should have been my decision. But she also shouldn't have kept this from me for 30 years. I flinched at the correction of Mom to Rebecca. Everyone has been lying to me, Thomas continued, his voice rising. My whole life is built on lies. That's not true, I began, but Thomas cut me off with a sharp gesture. Isn't it? You're not my mother. The man I thought was my father cheated on you with your sister, and you— He turned to Rachel. "You've been working to keep me away from the woman who raised me." Rachel's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" "I found your texts," Thomas said flatly. "To your sister, bragging about how you've been managing the mother-in-law problem, laughing about excluding her from family events." The color drained from Rachel's face. "Thomas, it was just venting. You know how challenging Rebecca can be sometimes." "No, Rachel, I don't know that." Thomas's voice was cold. "What I do know is that I've been blind to a lot of things." He turned to me. "I need more time. I have questions, but I'm not ready to ask them yet." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Thomas moved toward the door, then paused. "Don't come home tonight," he said to Rachel, not looking at her. "I need space to think. My mother—" He hesitated over the word, but continued. "Rebecca isn't the only one who's been keeping secrets." The door closed behind him, leaving Rachel and me in stunned silence. Rachel recovered first, her shock transforming back into anger as she gathered her purse. "This isn't over," she said, her voice low and threatening. "You've ruined everything." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I couldn't help but think she was right. I had ruined everything. Our fragile family balance, Thomas's sense of self, perhaps even his marriage. But for the first time in years, I'd spoken my truth. And despite the pain, despite the chaos that would surely follow, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. The weeks that followed were some of the loneliest of my life. Thomas retreated into silence, and I respected his need for space, though every day without contact felt like a physical ache. I'd check my phone constantly, hoping for a message that never came. January turned to February, bringing with it gray skies and bitter winds that matched my mood. I kept to my routines, volunteering, book club, my part-time job at the library, but moved through them like a ghost, present but not really there. My friend Diane from book club noticed. "You haven't been yourself lately," she observed over coffee one afternoon. "Is everything all right?" I hesitated, then gave her the simplified version. "Family troubles. My son and I are going through something difficult." She nodded sympathetically. "My daughter didn't speak to me for 6 months after her divorce. I thought my heart would break, but she came around eventually." "I hope Thomas does too," I said softly. "Give him time," Diane advised. "Men process things differently than we do." Time. It seemed that's all I had these days, empty hours to fill with regrets and what-ifs. I'd catch myself staring at the phone, willing it to ring, or looking at old photographs, trying to see what Thomas might now see, the truth hidden in plain sight. I wondered about my grandchildren. Did they ask about me? Did Thomas tell them anything? I missed Ethan's gap-toothed grin and Sophia's solemn questions about everything. I even found myself missing the chaos of family dinners, strained as they often were. Valentine's Day came and went. I sent cards to Ethan and Sophia as I always did, but received no acknowledgement. I wondered if Rachel had intercepted them. Then, on a rainy Wednesday in late February, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Thomas standing there, soaked from the downpour, his expression unreadable. "May I come in?" he asked formally, as if he were a stranger and not the boy I'd raised. "Of course." I stepped aside, my heart racing. "Let me get you a towel." When I returned, he was standing exactly where I'd left him, water dripping onto my welcome mat. He took the towel with a murmured thanks and patted his face dry. "I've been doing some research," he said without preamble. "I found some of Grace's old friends. They confirmed your story." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "I also found her parents, my grandparents, I guess. They're still alive, living in Arizona." "The Harmons," I said softly. Did you contact them? Thomas shook his head. Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. I gestured toward the living room. Please sit. Would you like some tea? Or something stronger? He almost smiled. Tea is fine. While I prepared it, I could hear him moving around the living room, looking at the photographs on the walls. When I returned with 2 steaming mugs, he was holding a framed picture of himself at about 8 years old, gap-toothed and grinning in a Little League uniform. I remember this day, he said. I struck out 3 times and missed an easy catch. I was so upset on the ride home. You were convinced you'd let everyone down, I recalled. I took you for ice cream and told you, baseball is just a game, but character is forever, he finished. And then you made me list 3 things I did well that day, even if they weren't about baseball. I smiled at the memory. You said, you'd been a good sport. You'd encouraged your teammates, and you'd remembered to thank the coach even though you were disappointed. Thomas set the photo down carefully. That was real. That moment. You being my mother. Yes, I agreed. It was. He took the mug I offered and sat on the couch, looking more tired than a man in his 30s should. Rachel and I are separating. The news shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. I'm sorry. Thomas laughed, a short, humorless sound. Are you? Yes, I said honestly. I never wanted to cause you pain. It wasn't just about this, he gestured, vaguely encompassing the revelation of his birth. We've been having problems for a while. I just didn't want to see them. He took a sip of tea before continuing. After I found out about my birth, I started questioning everything, including how Rachel treats you. I saw the texts. I heard how she talks about you when you're not around. I remembered all the times she forgot to invite you to things or scheduled visits when I wouldn't be home. I remained silent, letting him work through his thoughts. She always had a reasonable explanation, he continued, and I believed her because it was easier than confronting the alternative, that my wife was deliberately isolating me from my mother. Thomas, no, let me finish. He set his mug down firmly. I've had a lot of time to think these past weeks. About you, about Dad, about Grace, about the choices you all made. I braced myself for his anger, his judgment. What you did, raising me as your own after what Dad and Grace did to you, that was extraordinary, he said instead. I'm not sure I could have done the same. Tears sprang to my eyes, unexpected and hot. You were just a baby, I whispered. None of it was your fault. And none of it was yours either, Thomas said firmly. But you took on the responsibility anyway. You gave up your chance to have biological children because Dad didn't want more kids. You sacrificed your career to work 2 jobs so I could have opportunities. You did all that for a child who wasn't even yours by birth. You were mine in every way that matters, I managed, my voice thick with emotion. Thomas was quiet for a moment. I'm still angry, he admitted. At Dad for his betrayal. At Grace for leaving you to clean up her mess, even though I know her death wasn't her choice. At you for not telling me sooner. I understand, I said softly. You have every right to be angry. But I'm also grateful, he continued, for the life you gave me, for the love you showed me, even when I didn't deserve it. My tears spilled over then, and I didn't try to hide them. You always deserved it. Always. Thomas reached out hesitantly and took my hand. It was the first physical contact we'd had in weeks, and I clung to it like a lifeline. I don't know what happens next, he said. With Rachel, with us, with any of it. But I do know that I don't want to lose you. Again. You won't, I promised. I'm right here. We sat in silence for a while, the sound of rain against the windows, filling the space between us. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. Too much had happened for that, but it was a beginning. As Thomas prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "The kids miss you," he said, "especially Ethan. He keeps asking when he can see Grandma." Grandma. The word had never sounded so sweet. "Any time," I said, my heart feeling lighter than it had in years. "I'm always here for them. And for you." Thomas nodded. "I know, you always have been." He hesitated, then added, "Mom." It was just one word, but it meant everything. 1 year later, I stood in my kitchen arranging cookies on a platter while Sophia chatted away at the table, her hands busy, with colored paper and glitter. "Do you think Daddy will like his birthday card?" she asked, holding up her creation for inspection. "He'll love it," I assured her, "especially that part." I pointed to the glittery stick figure family she'd drawn in the corner. "That's me, and Ethan, and Daddy, and you, Grandma," she explained. "And that's our dog Oscar, and that's Ms. Jasmine." I smiled at the mention of Thomas's new girlfriend. Jasmine had come into his life 6 months ago, a fellow attorney with a warm laugh and kind eyes. Unlike Rachel, she treated me with genuine respect from the start, asking about my life and actually listening to my answers. "Ms. Jasmine is very pretty," I agreed, placing the last cookie on the platter. "She's nice too," Sophia said, returning to her artwork. "She lets me help when she cooks, even if I make a mess." From the living room came the sounds of Ethan and Thomas setting up the new board game I'd bought for family game night, a weekly tradition we'd started 3 months ago. The sound of their laughter warmed me more than the summer sunshine streaming through my kitchen window. So much had changed. In a year, Thomas and Rachel's separation had become a divorce, bitter and contentious at first, but eventually settled with a custody arrangement that gave Thomas the children half the time. Rachel had moved to Chicago for a new job, which meant the kids spent school years with Thomas and summers with her. Thomas had moved out of the large house he'd shared with Rachel and bought a smaller one closer to me. It wasn't perfect. The roof needed work and the backyard was little more than a patch of grass, but it felt more like a home than the showcase he'd lived in before. And me? I'd changed too. After 30 years of playing a role, the mother who wasn't really a mother, the inconvenient family member to be tolerated but not included, I was finally just being myself. Rebecca, grandmother, mother by choice if not by birth, a woman with her own interests and opinions and value. I'd even started dating again, cautiously. Just coffee dates so far with a kind widower named Paul who I'd met at the library. Thomas had been surprised at first, then supportive. "You deserve to be happy, Mom," he'd said. The words had brought tears to my eyes. "Grandma, can I lick the spoon?" Ethan dashed into the kitchen, eyeing the chocolate frosting bowl. "Of course you can." I handed it to him with a wink. "It's the chef's privilege." Thomas appeared in the doorway, watching us with a small smile. "Need any help in here?" "We're almost done," I assured him. "Just finishing up the frosting for your cake?" He came to stand beside me, reaching over to swipe a finger through the frosting. I swatted his hand playfully. "Wait your turn, Mom," he said, his tone suddenly serious. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you." My heart stuttered. Even after a year of healing, I still braced for rejection whenever his voice took on that tone. "I contacted Grace's parents," he said quietly. "My other grandparents." I set the frosting bowl down carefully. "I see. How did that go?" "Better than I expected. They're in their 80s now, but still sharp. They told me about Grace, what she was like as a child, her favorite books, how she loved photography." "She did?" I confirmed, memories of my sister flooding back. "She always had a camera in her hands. They showed me her photos. She was talented." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Grace had been talented in many ways, smarter than me, more beautiful, more confident. It had been easy to understand why Richard had fallen for her. "They asked about you," Thomas continued. "They remembered you from family gatherings years ago. They wanted to know if you were still in my life." "What did you tell them?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Thomas placed his hand over mine. "I told them the truth. That you've been my mother in every way that matters. That you gave up everything to raise me. That I couldn't have asked for a better mom." Tears stung my eyes. "You said that?" "I did. And I meant it." He squeezed my hand. "But that's not all. They want to meet you." "Me?" I echoed, surprised. "Yes. They said they've always been grateful to you for giving me the love and stability that Grace couldn't. They never reached out because Dad told them you wanted a clean break, to raise me as your own without complications." Another of Richard's lies, I realized. So many deceptions over the years, all in the name of protecting his comfortable life. "They'd like to meet you," Thomas repeated. "If you're open to it?" I considered the idea. A year ago, it would have terrified me, meeting the parents of the woman whose child I'd raised, the sister whose betrayal had changed the course of my life. But now? "I think I'd like that," I said finally. "They're part of your history, and yours is mine." Thomas smiled, relief evident in his expression. "Good. I hoped you'd say that." From the other room, Ethan called out, "Dad, Grandma, are we playing?" "Or what?" "Coming," Thomas called back. He turned to me. "Ready?" I looked around my kitchen, at Sophia happily creating art at the table, at the birthday cake waiting to be frosted, at my son standing beside me not because of obligation, but because he wanted to be there, and felt a contentment I'd never thought possible again. "More than ready," I replied. As we gathered around the living room table for the game, laughter and conversation flowing easily, I couldn't help but marvel at how life can change. A year ago, I'd stood in my son's foyer, staring at a cruel label someone had given me, the Envious Old Woman. That moment of humiliation had led to this, a genuine connection with my son, a place of honor in my grandchildren's lives, and a sense of peace I'd never known before. The secret I'd kept for 30 years, the truth I'd finally revealed, hadn't destroyed us after all. It had set us free. Later, as Thomas blew out the candles on his cake, Sophia on his lap and Ethan cheering beside him, he caught my eye across the table and mouthed 2 simple words. "Thank you." I smiled back, my heart full. The past year had taught me that family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes it's created through choice, through sacrifice, through forgiveness. Thomas wasn't my biological son, but he was my child in every way that mattered. I had chosen to be his mother 30 years ago, and every day since. And finally, after all these years, he had chosen me too. As Jasmine helped slice the cake, chatting easily with me about a book we'd both read, I felt the last pieces of my old life, the pretense, the fear, the silent suffering fall away completely. "Make a wish, Daddy," Sophia urged as Thomas prepared to blow out his candles. Thomas looked around the table, his gaze lingering on each of us before returning to me. "I don't need to," he said softly. "I already have everything I could wish for." I knew then that the label Rachel had meant to hurt me with, the envious old woman, had lost all its power. There was nothing to envy when you already possessed what truly mattered: love, freely given and honestly received. That night, as I prepared for bed in my quiet apartment, I took out an old photo of Grace, the last one taken before her death. I'd kept it hidden for decades, too painful to look at, too important to throw away. "He turned out well," I told her image softly. "You would be proud of him." For the first time, I felt no bitterness as I looked at my sister's face. Only peace. The secret that had silenced a family for so long had finally been spoken aloud, and in its wake came not destruction, but healing. I placed the photo on my bedside table instead of returning it to its hiding place. Tomorrow, I'd buy a proper frame for it. It was time to bring all parts of our story into the light.